Welcome to the Eduonix Web Development Series. In this course, we'll be learning pretty much all of the modern web development technologies, from HTML to JavaScript to JSON to PHP and server-side development, up into using PHP frameworks. In Chapter 1, we'll be discussing all the basics of HTML and CSS, and we'll be talking about the tools to use such as editors, browsers, and we'll go into creating an HTML document, the tag syntax, and then we'll look at the different ways that we can add CSS to our HTML, inline and through external style sheets, and we'll talk about some of the CSS3 features as well as the new HTML5 features. We'll be looking at how to create lists, unordered lists, and tables in HTML. And of course, these days we want to use CSS for layout and only use tables for tabular data. We'll also be talking about building HTML forms, and then we'll have a HTML project which will pretty much put into work all of the technologies that we learned in previous sections. Chapter 2 will be on JavaScript and the JavaScript library of jQuery. We'll discuss the fundamentals. We'll discuss JavaScript variables and arrays, all the programming basics, loops, conditionals, if statements, switch, and we'll also be looking at JavaScript and jQuery events, browser events that we can grab onto and make certain things happen when an event is launched, such as a click or a hover, things like that. And then we'll do a project that will have to do with JavaScript and jQuery. Chapter 3 will be all about data and ways to store and grab onto that data. We'll be talking about XML and JSON, which are similar. They're both used to store and transport data. We'll also be looking at the differences of the two. We'll be looking at XML schemas like DTD, which is document type definition type document. And we'll also be looking how to loop through a JSON object and a JSON array and output that onto the browser. And we'll also look into AJAX and asynchronous JavaScript. So we'll talk about how we can actually grab data from a file or a database or anything and not have the page reload, have that launched asynchronously through AJAX. And we'll go over the syntax of an AJAX script. We'll fetch data, and then in Chapter 3 we'll have a project that'll implement all of these technologies. In Chapter 4 we'll be getting into server-side scripting, and we'll use PHP, which is one of, if not the most popular server-side language that's available to us. So we'll go over the fundamentals. We will set up our environment. PHP cannot run on just a desktop computer. You have to have some kind of server, preferably an Apache server. And we're going to set up a program called XAMPP, which will give us an Apache server, PHP, MySQL. We'll be able to run all those things right on our desktop machine. We'll also talk about the basics, variables, arrays, loops, same things that we talked about in JavaScript, but things are slightly different in PHP, so I just want to make sure that we can make the difference in, say, the rules of a JavaScript variable versus the rules of a PHP variable. We'll talk about functions. We'll talk about including and requiring files, so we can include different files in a PHP file. Conditionals, and we'll talk a little bit about regular expressions and matching. And then finally we'll set up a PHP object-oriented project, just so we can see how to set up the classes and set up properties and methods and things like that. Chapter 5 we'll still be dealing with PHP, but we're going to add MySQL into the mix. We'll learn the fundamentals of MySQL, PHPMyAdmin, which is a GUI tool that we can use to manage our databases. We can also run queries right in PHPMyAdmin. We'll learn how to connect to a database through PHP, and we'll learn how to create an HTML form and actually submit data to our server, to our database from PHP. And there's a few different ways you can access and manage the database from PHP, and one of those ways is MySQLi, and there's a procedural way to do things, and then there's an object-oriented way to do things. So we'll be learning both of those, and then we'll move on to PDO, which is an extension which we can interact with the database using prepared statements. This is really the best practice these days in dealing with PHP and MySQL. And then we'll have a project where we will, I believe we'll be creating a task management system using PHP and MySQL. So Chapter 6 will be all about frameworks. We'll talk about what a framework is, and where every language has frameworks, but we'll be in particular looking at PHP frameworks. And we'll take a look at the top 5, and then we're going to choose the YII framework, YII, to work with and learn about, because it's one of the most popular frameworks for PHP, and it's pretty easy to learn. We'll be installing it and creating an application using the framework. We'll use a tool called Ghee, which will help us generate our MVC, our models, controllers, and views, and then we'll show you how to interact with the database, and then finally we'll have a project where we'll actually create a small website using Ghee. So that's a pretty brief summary of what we'll be doing. We'll be covering web development from front to back, and let's get started.